a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Paul McCartney. Sir James Paul McCartney is an English singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and composer. He gained worldwide fame as the bass guitarist and singer for the rock band The Beatles, widely considered the most popular and influential group in the history of pop music. His songwriting partnership with John Lennon was the most successful of the post-war era. After the group disbanded in 1970, he pursued a solo career and formed the band Wings with his first wife, Linda, and Denny Laine. McCartney is one of the most successful composers and performers of all time. More than 2,200 artists have covered his Beatles song, Yesterday, making it one of the most covered songs in popular music history. Wings' 1977 release, Mull of Kintyre, is one of the all-time best-selling singles in the UK. A two-time inductee into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and an 18-time Grammy Award winner, McCartney has written, or co-written, 32 songs that have reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and he had 25.5 million RIAA-certified units in the United States. McCartney, Lennon, George Harrison and Ringo Starr all received appointment as members of the Order of the British Empire in 1965 and, in 1997, McCartney was knighted for services to music. McCartney is also one of the wealthiest musicians in the world, with an estimated net worth of $1.2 billion. McCartney has released an extensive catalogue of songs as a solo artist and has composed classical and electronic music. He has taken part in projects to promote international charities related to such subjects as animal rights, seal hunting, land mines, vegetarianism, poverty, and music education. He has married 3 times and is the father of 5 children. Early life. James Paul McCartney was born on the 18th of June 1942 in Walton Hospital, Liverpool, England, where his mother, Mary Patricia, had qualified to practice as a nurse. His father, James McCartney, was absent from his son's birth due to his work as a volunteer firefighter during World War II. McCartney has one younger brother named Michael and a stepsister, Ruth. The children were baptized in their mother's Catholic faith, even though their father was a former Protestant turned agnostic. Religion was not emphasized in the household. McCartney attended Stockton Wood Road Primary School in Speke from 1947 until 1949, when he transferred to Joseph Williams Junior School in Belle Vale, because of overcrowding at Stockton. In 1953, with only 3 others out of 90 examinees, he passed the 11+ exam, meaning he could attend the Liverpool Institute, a grammar school rather than a secondary modern school. In 1954, he met schoolmate George Harrison on the bus from his suburban home in Speke. The two quickly became friends. McCartney later admitted, "I tended to talk down to him, because he was a year younger." McCartney's mother, Mary, was a midwife and the family's primary wage earner. Her earnings enabled them to move into 24th Lynn Road in Allerton, where they lived until 1964. She rode a bicycle to her patients. McCartney described an early memory of her leaving at about 3 in the morning, the streets thick with snow. On the 31st of October 1956, when McCartney was 14, his mother died of an embolism. McCartney's loss later became a point of connection with John Lennon, whose mother, Julia, had died when he was 17. McCartney's father was a trumpet player and pianist, who had led Jim Mack's jazz band in the 1920s. He kept an upright piano in the front room, encouraged his sons to be musical and advised Paul to take piano lessons, but Paul preferred to learn by ear. At age 11, he encouraged Paul to audition for the Liverpool Cathedral Choir, but he was not accepted. Paul then joined the choir at St Barnabas Church, Mossley Hill. He gave Paul a nickel-plated trumpet for his 14th birthday. But when rock and roll became popular on Radio Luxembourg, McCartney traded it for a £15 Framus Zenith acoustic guitar. Since he wanted to be able to sing while playing, he found it difficult to play guitar right-handed. But after noticing a poster advertising a Slim Whitman concert and realizing that Whitman played left-handed, he reversed the order of the strings. McCartney wrote his first song, I Lost My Little Girl, on the Zenith, and composed another early tune that would become When I'm 64, on the piano. American rhythm and blues influenced him, and Little Richard was his schoolboy idol. Long Tall Sally was the first song McCartney performed in public at a Gotland's Philly holiday camp talent competition. 1957-1960, The Quarrymen. At the age of 15 on 6 July 1957, McCartney met John Lennon and his band, the Quarrymen, at the St. Peter's Church Hall Fete in Woolton. The Quarrymen played a mix of rock and roll and skiffle, a type of popular music with jazz, blues and folk influences. Soon afterwards, the members of the band invited McCartney to join as a rhythm guitarist, and he formed a close working relationship with Lennon. Harrison joined in 1958 as lead guitarist, followed by Lennon's art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe on bass, in 1960. By May 1960 the band had tried several names, including Johnny and the Moondogs, Beatles, and the Silver Beatles. They adopted the name The Beatles in August 1960 and recruited drummer Pete Best shortly before a 5-engagement residency in Hamburg. 1960-1970, The Beatles. The Beatles were informally represented by Alan Williams. In 1960, the group booked its first performance at a residency in Hamburg. In 1961, Sutcliffe left the band and McCartney reluctantly became their bass player. While in Hamburg, they recorded professionally for the first time and were credited as the Beat Brothers, who were the backing band for English singer Tony Sheridan on the single, My Bonnie. This resulted in attention from Brian Epstein, who was a key figure in their subsequent development and success. He became their manager in January 1962. Ringo Starr replaced Best in August, and the band had their first hit, Love Me Do, in October, becoming popular in the UK in 1963, and in the US a year later. The fan hysteria became known as Beatlemania, and the press sometimes referred to McCartney as the cute Beatle. In August 1965, the Beatles released the McCartney composition, Yesterday, featuring a string quartet, included on the Help LP. The song was the group's first recorded use of classical music elements and their first recording that involved only a single band member. Yesterday became one of the most covered songs in popular music history. Later that year, during recording sessions for the album Rubber Soul, McCartney began to supplant Lennon as the dominant musical force in the band. Musicologist Ian MacDonald wrote, from 1965, McCartney would be in the ascendant not only as a songwriter, but also as instrumentalist, arranger, producer, and de facto musical director of the Beatles. Critics described Rubber Soul as a significant advance in the refinement and profundity of the band's music and lyrics. Considered a high point in the Beatles' catalogue, both Lennon and McCartney said they had written the music for the song, In My Life. McCartney said of the album, "We'd had our cute period, and now it was time to expand." Recording engineer Norman Smith stated that the Rubber Soul sessions exposed indications of increasing contention within the band. The clash between John and Paul was becoming obvious. And, as far as Paul was concerned, George Harrison could do no right. Paul was absolutely finicky. In 1966, the Beatles released the album Revolver, featuring sophisticated lyrics, studio experimentation, and an expanded repertoire of musical genres ranging from innovative string arrangements to psychedelic rock. The album marked an artistic leap for the Beatles, the first of 3 consecutive McCartney asides. The single, Paperback Writer, preceded the LP's release. The Beatles produced a short promotional film for the song, and another for its B-side, Rain. The films, described by Harrison as the forerunner of videos, aired on The Ed Sullivan Show and Top of the Pops in June 1966. Revolver also included McCartney's Eleanor Rigby, which featured a string octet. According to Gould, the song is a neoclassical tour de force, a true hybrid, conforming to no recognizable style or genre of song. Except for some backing vocals, the song included only McCartney's lead vocal and the strings arranged by producer George Martin. The band gave their final commercial concert at the end of their 1966 US tour. Later that year, McCartney completed his first musical project apart from the group, a film score for the UK production The Family Way. The score was a collaboration with Martin, who used 2 McCartney themes to write 13 variations. The soundtrack failed to chart, but it won McCartney an Ivor Novello Award for Best Instrumental Theme. Upon the end of the Beatles' performing career, McCartney sensed unease in the band and wanted them to maintain creative productivity. He pressed them to start a new project, which became Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, widely regarded as rock's first concept album. McCartney was inspired to create a new persona for the group, to serve as a vehicle for experimentation, and to demonstrate to their fans that they had musically matured. He invented the fictional band of the album's title track. As McCartney explained, "We were fed up with being the Beatles. We really hated that fucking 4 little mop-top approach. We were not boys, we were men. And we thought of ourselves as artists rather than just performers." Starting in November 1966, the band adopted an experimental attitude during recording sessions for the album. According to engineer Jeff Emerick, the Beatles were looking to go out on a limb, both musically and sonically. "We were utilizing a lot of tape varispeeding and other manipulation techniques, limiters and effects like flanging and ADT. Their recording of A Day in the Life required a 40-piece orchestra, which Martin and McCartney took turns conducting. The sessions produced the double A-side single, Strawberry Fields Forever / Penny Lane, in February 1967, and the LP followed in June. McCartney's She's Leaving Home was an orchestral pop song. MacDonald described the track as, among the finest work on Sgt. Pepper, imperishable popular art of its time, based on an ink drawing by McCartney. The LP's cover included a collage designed by pop artists Peter Blake and Jan Howarth, featuring the Beatles in costume as the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, standing with a host of celebrities. The heavy moustaches worn by the Beatles reflected the growing influence of hippie-style trends on the band, while their clothing spoofed the vogue in Britain for military fashions, wrote Gould. Scholar David Scott Caston described Sgt. Pepper as the most important and influential rock and roll album ever recorded. Epstein's death at age 32 in August 1967 created a void, which left the Beatles perplexed and concerned about their future. McCartney stepped in to fill that void and gradually became the de facto leader and business manager of the group that Lennon had once led. In his first creative suggestion after this change of leadership, McCartney proposed that the band move forward on their plans to produce a film for television, which was to become Magical Mystery Tour. According to Beatles historian Mark Lewison, the project was an administrative nightmare throughout. McCartney largely directed the film, which brought the group their first unfavorable critical response. However, the film's soundtrack was more successful. It was released in the UK as a 6-track double extended play disc, and as an identically titled LP in the US, filled out with 5 songs from the band's recent singles. The only Capitol compilation later included in the group's official canon of studio albums. The Magical Mystery Tour LP achieved $8 million in sales within 3 weeks of its release, higher initial sales than any other Capitol LP up to that point. The Beatles' animated film Yellow Submarine, loosely based on the imaginary world evoked by McCartney's 1966 composition, premiered in July 1968. Though critics admired the film for its visual style, humor and music, the soundtrack album issued 6 months later received a less enthusiastic response. By late 1968, relations within the band were deteriorating. The tension grew during the recording of their self-titled double album, also known as the White Album. Matters worsened the following year during the Let It Be sessions, when a camera crew filmed McCartney lecturing the group. "We've been very negative since Mr. Epstein passed away. We were always fighting his discipline a bit, but it's silly to fight that discipline if it's our own." In March 1969, McCartney married his first wife, Linda Eastman, and in August, the couple had their first child, Mary, named after his late mother. Abbey Road was the band's last recorded album, and Martin suggested a continuously moving piece of music, urging the group to think symphonically. McCartney agreed, but Lennon did not. They eventually compromised, agreeing to McCartney's suggestion, an LP featuring individual songs on side 1, and a long medley on side 2. In October 1969, a rumor surfaced that McCartney had died in a car crash in 1966 and been replaced by a lookalike, but this was quickly refuted when a November Life magazine cover featured him and his family, accompanied by the caption, "Paul is still with us." McCartney was in the midst of business disagreements with his bandmates when he announced his departure from the group on the 10th of April 1970. He filed suit for the band's formal dissolution on the 31st of December 1970. More legal disputes followed as McCartney's attorneys, his in-laws John and Lee Eastman, fought the three remaining Beatles business manager, Alan Klein, over royalties and creative control. An English court legally dissolved the Beatles on the 9th of January 1975. Though sporadic lawsuits against their record company EMI, Klein, and each other persisted until 1989. McCartney was depressed after the group disbanded. His wife helped him pull out of that condition by praising his work as a songwriter and convincing him to continue writing and recording. In her honor, he wrote, "Maybe I'm amazed," explaining that with the Beatles breaking up, that was my feeling. "Maybe I'm amazed at what's going on. Maybe I'm a man and maybe you're the only woman who could ever help me. Baby, won't you help me understand? Maybe I'm amazed at the way you pulled me out of time, hung me on the line. Maybe I'm amazed at the way I really need you." He added that, "Every love song I write is for Linda." 1970-1981, Wings. After the Beatles broke up in 1970, McCartney continued his musical career with his first solo release, McCartney, a US #1 album. Apart from some vocal contributions from Linda, McCartney is a one-man album, with McCartney providing compositions, instrumentation and vocals. In 1971, he collaborated with Linda and drummer Denny Laine on a second album, Ram, a UK #1 and a US top 5. Ram included the co-written US #1 hit single, Uncle Albert/Admiral Halsey. Later that year, ex-Moody Blues guitarist Denny Laine joined the McCartneys and Sewell to form the band Wings. McCartney had this to say on the group's formation: "Wings were always a difficult idea. Any group having to follow the Beatles' success would have a hard job. I found myself in that very position. However, it was a choice between going on or finishing, and I loved music too much to think of stopping." In September 1971, the McCartneys' daughter Stella was born, named in honor of Linda's grandmothers. Both of them were named Stella. Following the addition of guitarist Henry McCulloch, Wings' first concert tour began in 1972 with a debut performance in front of an audience of 700 at the University of Nottingham. 10 more gigs followed as they travelled across the UK in a van during an unannounced tour of universities, during which the band stayed in modest accommodation and received pay and coinage collected from students, while avoiding Beatles songs during their performances. McCartney later said, "The main thing I didn't want was to come on stage, faced with the whole torment of 5 rows of press people with little pads, all looking at me and saying, 'Oh well, he is not as good as he was.' So we decided to go out on that university tour, which made me less nervous. By the end of that tour I felt ready for something else, so we went into Europe. During the 7-week, 25-show Wings Over Europe tour, the band played almost solely Wings and McCartney solo material. The Little Richard cover, Long Tall Sally, was the only song that had previously been recorded by the Beatles. McCartney wanted the tour to avoid large venues. Most of the small halls they played had capacities of fewer than 3,000 people. In March 1973, Wings achieved their first US #1 single, My Love, included on their second LP, Red Rose Speedway, a US #1 and UK top 5. McCartney's collaboration with Linda and former Beatles producer Martin resulted in the song Live and Let Die, which was the theme song for the James Bond film of the same name. Nominated for an Academy Award, the song reached #2 in the US and #9 in the UK. It also earned Martin a Grammy for his orchestral arrangement. Music professor and author Vincent Benitez described the track as symphonic rock at its best. After the departure of McCulloch and Sewell in 1973, the McCartneys and Laine recorded Band on the Run. The album was the first of 7 Platinum Wings LPs. It was a US and UK #1, the band's first to top the charts in both countries, and the first ever to reach Billboard magazine's charts on 3 separate occasions. One of the best-selling releases of the decade, it remained on the UK charts for 124 weeks. Rolling Stone named it one of the best albums of the year for 1973, and in 1975 Paul McCartney and Wings won the Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Performance for the song, Band on the Run. And Jeff Emerick won the Grammy for Best Engineered Recording for the album. In 1974, Wings achieved a second US #1 single with the title track. The album also included the top 10 hits, Jet, and Hell on Wheels, and earned the 413th spot on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Wings followed Band on the Run with the chart-topping albums Venus and Mars and Wings at the Speed of Sound. In 1975, they began the 14-month Wings Over the World Tour, which included stops in the UK, Australia, Europe and the US. The tour marked the first time McCartney performed Beatles songs live with Wings, with 5 in the 2-hour set list: I've Just Seen a Face, Yesterday, Blackbird, Lady Madonna, and The Long and Winding Road. Following the second European leg of the tour and extensive rehearsals in London, the group undertook an ambitious US arena tour that yielded the US #1 live triple LP Wings Over America. In September 1977, the McCartneys had a third child, a son they named James. In November, the Wings song, Mull of Kintyre, co-written with Laine, was quickly becoming one of the best-selling singles in UK chart history. The most successful single of McCartney's solo career, it achieved double the sales of the previous record holder, She Loves You, and went on to sell 2.5 million copies and hold the UK sales record until the 1984 charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas? London Town spawned a US #1 single, and was Wings' best-selling LP since Band on the Run, making the top 5 in both the US and the UK. Critical reception was unfavourable, and McCartney expressed disappointment with the album. Back to the Egg featured McCartney's collaboration with a rock supergroup dubbed The Rockestra. Credited to Wings, the band included Pete Townsend, David Gilmour, Gary Brooker, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham. Though certified platinum, critics panned the album. Wings completed their final concert tour in 1979, with 20 shows in the UK that included the live debut of the Beatles songs, Got to Get You Into My Life, The Fool on the Hill, and Let It Be. In 1980, McCartney released his second solo LP, the self-produced McCartney 2, which peaked at #1 in the UK and #3 in the US. As with his first album, he composed and performed it alone. The album contained the song, Coming Up, the live version of which, recorded in Glasgow, Scotland, in 1979 by Wings, became the group's last #1 hit. By 1981, McCartney felt he had accomplished all he could creatively with Wings, and decided he needed a change. The group disbanded in April 1981 after Laine quit following disagreements over royalties and salaries. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?